Welcome to the second module of the course Photoshop Flyer Design for Beginners, and in this module we'll be looking at Photoshop Basics for Beginners. And what are the topics we'll be covering? We'll be looking at creating new documents, a new file, you can call it a new design. We'll be looking at the difference between raster and vector layers when it comes to graphics design. We'll be explaining resolution, what do we mean by 72 ppi, what do we mean by 300 ppi, what exactly does ppi itself mean, and which of the two should you pick when you're working on a design. And lastly, we'll be having an interface overview of the Photoshop software itself. So without further ado, let's get started. So creating a new file. When you open Photoshop, it takes you to the home screen where you are going to see your recent designs. So let me open Photoshop on my laptop and wait for it to load. Yeah, yours might take longer and might even be faster, depends on how good your PC is. Now this is your home screen and you're going to see your recent designs here. Do not worry if this is empty. It basically means you've not done any design in a long time, or you've not designed at all in Photoshop. And here you can toggle how big your designs look, how big their thumbnails are. If I click on this grid view, now I'm going to see my thumbnails bigger, so it gives me a better view of my designs. And if I click on this, and it gives me a longer list, right? I can see more designs at Can I see more designs at the same time? Let's look at that. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8, and let's go back to this view. Yeah, I think this is better because basically you can see 10 designs and everyone will see a better overview of our recent designs. So after getting to the home page, we are looking at creating a new file, right? So you come here, click on new file, it pops up the document properties window. Here's where you set all your properties. I would explain what all this means, what resolution means, and there's also a shortcut like Ctrl N. Now all the shortcuts I'll be mentioning in this course, you really do not have to cram them, although it would be good for you to know them as it will make your workflow faster. But then it's just a matter of muscle memory. The more you design, the more these shortcuts become a part of you. So when you want to create a new design, when you've gotten to the document properties window, you ask yourself basic questions like, what size do I want my design to be, or what shape do I want it to take? Do I want it to be a square? Do I want it to be a landscape? Do I want it to be portrait? Do I have a specific size in mind? You know, when you're working for clients, which is definitely the end goal, they might be specific that I want my design to be in square ratio, or I want it to look like a rectangle, right? If you are working on a billboard is going to be a rectangle that is wider than its tall, that's landscape. And if you are working on a basic flyer design for social media and it's not square, then it's going to be portrait, where it's actually taller, let me use the word, taller than its wide. Let me just give a quick visual example of that. This is a square, right? This is portrait. You can see it. You can see the height is greater than the width. Yes, let's use the proper terms. And then this is landscape. The width is greater than the height. And let me type this so you can take a screenshot of it if you want to. And don't worry about what I'm doing yet. You'll be able to do it. You'll be able to do everything yourself soon enough. This is square aspect ratio. This is portraits. And this is landscape. Alright, just a recap of it. A square, all sides are equal. We know that already. Then for portrait, the height is much more than the width. Then for landscape, the width is much more than the height. So this is what determines your size. Let me close this and go back to where we were. So we've talked about the size, the width and the height, and you can work in inches, pixels, centimeters. I basically work in inches because it's just easy for me. I can switch easily between designing for screens and designing for prints. And your color mode stays RGB because you're designing a flyer. If you were designing a banner, you can change this to CMYK. Then your background content can either be white or transparent. I use white because it works for me. I do not bother with this. Now when it comes to the size of the documents, which is the width and height, they are usually presets that come with Photoshop. For example, if you go to art and illustration, you'll see the size for a poster, which is 18 by 24 inches, basically 300 ppi. 4 by 6 inches for a postcard, 300 ppi. You see web, you see mobile, you see film and video, right? But I rarely use this because I'm doing a flyer. I know what I want to do. It's either a square or it's portrait or it's landscape, so I enter my values myself. Let's go back to the sense and look at resolution. To explain resolution, you can see we have pixels per inch or pixels per centimeter. And what does it mean? Pixels per inch is ppi, right? So if I click on create, I'll be designing in a resolution of 300 pixels per inch or 300 ppi. What does pixels mean? Now we'll be looking at it from the perspective of a contrast between pixels and vector when it comes to the sign. So that is what we are going to next. Raster images are made up of tiny pixels, right? And each pixel has a color. Together they form a complete image. So the pixel is basically the smallest unit of a digital image. The mango we have on the left over here, then we annotate. This mango we have over here is a pixel, and the one we have over here is a vector. Merely looking at it, we can see that this looks like something that we drew on something we drew using a computer software, while this looks like an actual photograph of a mango. Now what's the difference between raster and vector? Let's use an example to explain that. Back to Photoshop, let me open this. Yeah, now if you zoom into this, you start seeing the squares that make up the mango, right? You see the squares that make up the image. It looks like, oh, it's just a mango, but definitely things come together to make it up, right? And each square you are seeing is a pixel and it has its own distinct color. So when you join everything together, when everything comes together, it forms whatever shape you want it to form. Now Photoshop is raster based, which means whatever you put there, even if it's a vector, it would appear as a pixel. Look at this example of a vector, and I'm seeing it as a pixel. So to explain what a vector is and for you to visualize it, I'm going to use another software which is both pixel and raster based. Affinity by Canva. Will be drawing we'll be doing an ellipse with affinity here, and let me draw my ellipse and pick a color for it. You don't need to worry about how affinity works. That's not the software we are looking at in this course. I'm just using it to explain what a vector is. Now look at a raster. The more we zoom in, we start seeing the pixels, and you can see the edges are kind of not smooth, right? They are haggard. But if you look at a typical vector, the more you zoom in, you still see that the edges are smooth. Why? Because a vector is made up of a mathematical equation, so your zoom does not affect the equation. The more you zoom in does not change the equation still stays the same. And from our slide, we have that vector images are made up of paths, lines, and shapes defined by mathematical equation. So in short, raster means pixel based and resolution dependent, right? Pixels per inch, it means take a literal inch, let's say 300 pixels per inch, you'll be able to find 300 pixels in that single inch of your design. So the more pixels you find in that single inch, the higher your resolution will be, right? And vector is path based and infinitely scalable. That is, I can zoom in as long as I want, as much as I want. The edge will still stay sharp, but I can't do the same for a circle in a raster based application like Photoshop. Now if you still don't get this, you can go online to search for the difference between raster and vector. It's not really something that matters for you as a beginner in graphic design, but as you go on, you would definitely need to know the difference. So next, we'll be looking at resolution. I've explained a bit of resolution, and the PPI means the number of pixels per inch. You take a literal inch of your design. Let's say this is 1 inch, right? Then you can see, all those little squares that we were talking about that have distinct colors. You'll be able to see 300 of them in that single inch. So that's what resolution is. If you have 600 of them, that means it will take longer for you to zoom in and see the squares. If you have 900 pixels per inch, it will take longer, much longer for you to zoom in and see the squares. So the higher the number of squares, the higher your resolution is and the sharper your image looks. Now when you are designing, there are questions that are asked like, do I use 72 ppi, do I use 300 ppi? Now personally, I use 300 ppi just out of stubborn habits, right? Not really stubborn habits, but I use 300 ppi because it's convenient and I do not have to worry if I'm printing the design or it's going to be online data. So what really is the influence of ppi and 300 ppi? It actually doesn't matter, right? If you are designing for mobile, if you are designing for maybe your phone or your laptop and the design is not going to be printed on something like a large paper or a banner, the PPI does not matter, right? It's still going to look the same way. But the moment you want to print it out and the PPI is too low, by the time you print your printout, you will start seeing squares in your printout. That's why you see some banners or flyers, right? That's why you see some banners or some flyers outside and the picture they use in it looks blurry. That's because the resolution is low, which implies that there are too little pixels per inch. So when you blow it up and you print it on something large, the squares become bigger and more obvious. So if the resolution was higher and there are more pixels per inch, by the time you blow it up and make it larger, the squares really won't be that obvious. So in short, for flyer design, which this course is about, you can use 72 and you can use 300. Another thing that influences your choice is how good your laptop is. You might use 300 ppi like I'm doing and Photoshop starts to slow down. So if you notice that, just reduce it to 150. There are people that use 500 ppi. I mean, your laptop can take it. So if you see your laptop is slowing down, just switch to 72 ppi. It does not matter. Now my usual settings, I make sure none of the sides are less than 3 inches long. Really, that does not really happen. It's just out of habit really. And the resolution of 300 ppi. So back to Photoshop, creating a new file, which is what we are looking at. Let's say I want to create a flyer. It's by 10 and the resolution of 300. I'll just create. Now should I use 8 by 10 or use 4 by 5? That's another question that gets asked. Now the size of your design doesn't matter, right? For web, the aspect ratio does, right? Let's say I have 8 by 10 and I have 4 by 5. if you try to simply make these numbers smaller, or you try to divide the two by the same thing, this 8 by 5 ends up becoming 4 by 5. So the aspect ratio is the same thing. A 10 by 10 design has the same aspect ratio as 1 million by 1 million inch design. And let's say 3 by 6 has the same aspect ratio as 10 by 20, right? So it's the aspect ratio that matters, not the actual values. But I make sure none of this is just less than 3 at least, so my design does not just blow out when I zoom slightly. Now you can check online also for videos that explain this more extensively, but it's not something you really have to bother about. And next we'll be looking at the interface, the Photoshop interface itself. Now I like to see Photoshop split into 4 sections, right? The toolbar section 1, the canvas. Now I take this as the same because they are on the same side of the screen, right? And the menu bar and the menu and options bar as the 4th. Now this is on the left, this is on the left, this is at the top, yeah, this is on the right side, and the canvas is at the center of the screen. So the toolbar is, as the name suggests, it's where you find the tools we use to design. So let's go back to Photoshop. With our settings, it's by 10 to 300 ppi. Let's create it. What we have here on the left is the toolbar. This is where we'll see the tools we'll be using in the design. Let's say I need to draw a rectangle. I'm going to pick the rectangle tool, which is this. Now the shortcut is U. And how do you know the shortcuts? You don't need to cram them. You just hover on the tool, then come to the pop-up. You see it listed here, right? You can see it's rectangle tool U. So if I click on U, I can draw a rectangle. If I click on V, it goes back to my move tool. You can see that move tool is V. I'm going to explain what the essential tools do in another video, and basically the shortcuts we should not have to memorize, or you should get used to make your workflow faster. The canvas, this is a canvas, the whole of this space, this is your canvas, right? It's where your design actually takes place, and this is the artboard. Let me draw this, and people confuse the canvas with the artboard, right? Now we can see this is on the artboard and this is not on the artboard. Let me try and export. I can only see this rectangle on whatever I'm going to export. Why? Because it's only on the canvas and it's not on the artboard, right? So the canvas allows you to, the canvas is basically your playground where you drop your inspirations, elements you're using in the design, and you feel like, I'm not sure, let me just put it aside for some time and see if I'll need it later. You just take it out of the artboard and keep it on your canvas. Then next we have the layers panel. It's where you manage all the elements in your design. So everything that shows up on your screen, including the whole canvas and the artboard. Let me copy this. Let me draw another shape ellipse. You see it on your layers panel, and this is where you can make changes like adding an overlay, basically changes you want to do to whatever element you have, right? You can rename it, you can rename your layers, you can hide it. It's basically the control center for everything you see on your artboard or your canvas. And this is why I said I like grouping the layers panel, the layers and properties together. Now you can see they are both on the right side of the screen, right? So it makes sense to have them together. Now the properties panel is context sensitive. What does this mean? It means that it changes, right? Context sensitive. It changes depending on what you have selected be it a text, a shape, an image, an adjustment or an effect. And let me type a text now. The text tool, horizontal typed tool, the shortcut is T. We remove some. Yeah, I think that's fine. There's no need to be specific. We are not designing. I have this. Let me go back to my move to view so I can select without editing. Now clicking on this, you can see it brings out the properties of a text. Like you can change the size, the gap between lines and the color. Now let's make it a rectangle. You can see the properties panel changes depending on what you have selected. If I bring in an image, for example an image I downloaded online, I won't be able to change the fill obviously, so I'm not going to see this in the properties panel when I select an image. So it's context sensitive, it changes depending on what you have selected at a point in time. And lastly, we have the menu bar and options bar. So this is where you will really go when you are doing design. So basically go there, let's say 4 or 5 times in total throughout the design. It's where you make changes to the Photoshop interface itself. You change your settings, you come to preferences, you edit your toolbars, you add some effects to 1 or 2 layers. So basically that's the Photoshop interface divided into the toolbar section, the properties and layers panel, your main artboard or your canvas, and then we have the menu section. Alright, and that's all for this episode. See you in the next one.